You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Well, hi everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday again, and with me this week is Juila Yang. I'm super excited to talk to you today, Julia. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you, Benjamin. I'm in Arlington, Massachusetts at the moment.
Tremendous.
A far cry. So,
All right. Yeah, I'll bet it's beautiful this time of year. Excellent. All right. Well, so it's always great to start by hearing people's story of kind of how they met the cello in the first place. How did you get started as a cellist? And then what was the journey that took you to where you are today?
sure. I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida, and my mother was a pianist, and she wanted all of her kids, me and my three siblings, to play an instrument. So, my start was pretty early. I think she knew that she would like me to play the cello at the time that I was born. And I think she was sort of encouraging me the first few years of my life before I could even say any words that this would be my path. So by the time I was 6 years old, which is when I started to play, I was actually very excited about it. And I started on the piano actually at age 5, learned a little bit of reading music and note names and things like that and solfege. And I actually stopped a year or two in once I started playing the cello. Um, I think I loved it right away. I had a number of different interests. I played sports. I enjoyed academics, but their stories, I suppose, of whenever guests would come over to our home, I would bring my cello to them and my seat, and I would start playing a song. So it was sort of it was a love from an early age. I was lucky, in Tallahassee there aren't these prep programs, say in Boston or New York or some of these bigger cities. Um, but I think I was lucky that there were some wonderful cello teachers, and that's really how I was inspired as a child. Um, Florida State University is in Tallahassee, so starting in middle school or so, I was taking some lessons with the professor there, Lubomir Georgiev, an incredible cellist. And I found inspiration actually through going to summer music camps, also starting in late middle school, I suppose, and mostly through high school. And that's really where I found a community of friends and other musicians, and also met different teachers from all over the country. So that's something that I would highly recommend to young, serious players to check out different summer music festivals or music camps, just to start to make friends in that world, friends that probably might last a very, very long time, and just to get to know the greater musical scene.
Mhm.
So I I guess I suppose for myself, I was interested in all sorts of subjects and wanted to go to university. So I was looking specifically at different universities that had strong cello programs and also academics. And ultimately decided to go to Northwestern University. Hans-Jürgen Jensen is a wonderful pedagogue there, wonderful cellist. He took all sorts of classes and did a business minor also. And but really decided in college that I wanted to pursue music as a career, or at least try. It's difficult enough, as I think we come to realize as musicians. Um, but Hans was wonderful. I would say in my undergrad, in particular, I really focused on technique and fine tuning the mechanics of playing cello. I mean, this is like a lifelong sort of endeavor, but in college in particular, there's a lot of time to practice and to really focus on this in particular. And Hans, my teacher at the time, inspired his studio to be thinking about scales, thinking about how to be able to play cleanly, at speed, and we did a number of competitions and things like that, which is not for everybody, but it was helpful, I think, actually, just to have the focus of learning a particular body of repertoire, and being able to play it at a high level, at a level that you're um, maybe not happy to play for a jury, but willing to play for a jury. Um, and then from there, I went to New England Conservatory for my master's, studied with Lawrence Lesser, uh, an incredibly inspiring pedagogue. With Mr. Lesser, I would say his focus was less on technique. There were definitely certain techniques that he taught me and his various students, but it was much more about the art of music and the background of different pieces, often giving cultural, historical background and context to the repertoire that I was bringing. Maybe drawing on different pieces of art and talking about their qualities in a lesson, just to sort of give you a richer image of what is behind this music, what is the context for this music. I found that to be very inspiring. Also, when he would play and demonstrate, it was the way that he would play a phrase would be so much richer than what looked to be on the page. And just connecting that with a real sort of human spirit. So I feel that I owe a lot to both Hans Jørgen Jensen and to Mr. Lesser for those contributions to their studios. Many more cellists than me. At New England Conservatory, I also fell in love with chamber music. It's a huge chamber music school, and the faculty there in particular are incredible chamber musicians from all sorts of quartets and trios. And I was still thinking that I might want to do orchestra. That was something that I was thinking in my undergrad. And so I did pursue going to the New World Symphony following my master's, which I did for 2 years. Played a whole lot of orchestral concerts. Also got to play some recitals, concerto, chamber music. It was quite diverse in the type of music making that they allowed you to do and gave you opportunities to do. And I realized there that I did want to do chamber music. So following the New World Symphony, I ended up doing a fellowship in New York City, Ensemble Connect. It's run through Carnegie and Juilliard, and it's a group at the time of 18 musicians, two cellists. We played chamber music, did different residencies, and a large part of the program was going to public city schools and working with string teachers in that capacity, doing interactive performances, but just working with orchestras in high schools and string technique classes. And while I was in Ensemble Connect, I was looking to form a chamber music ensemble, and ultimately my Merz Trio, a piano trio, was formed there in New York. And that's been a large part of my musical life the past 7 years or so. We did a residency at the New England Conservatory and did a number of competitions and have just been playing concerts since then. So that's a lot of my musical life, and in the past few years, I've gotten into the teaching side of things, and that has been actually a really exciting part of my sort of musical thought and a challenge, I suppose. Inspiration also, just to get to work with younger students and see where their paths are sort of leading, and not really knowing, but
Right.
Helping to lead in whatever way I can.
Well, and it's very rewarding to be able to not only help them in their cello playing, but to inspire them towards where they want to go, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And often a student might come without knowing exactly where they want to go career-wise. Of course, it feels very open, but just being able to help them to listen to different things that they weren't able to hear before, or to focus on different parts of their playing, and yeah, just building awareness and different skills. It's
All right,
exciting.
so um, Hans and Lawrence, so they have both been to ASTA conferences, for example, to present, and of course, always whatever else is going on, then I'm going to go hear what they have to say, and very different feel to what they focus on. Very and fitting like what you were describing, the Hans Jensen trying to find the exact precise spot for the bow, depending on where the left hand is, sort of thing, and then Lawrence Lesser just tying in musical interpretation to life, the universe, and everything, sort of thing. But so you, as a teacher too, how do you find? I always like to ask this question: how do your teachers kind of their voices resonate in your head as you are teaching?
They very much resonate. If you're familiar with Hans Jensen, he has a very particular accent, which all of his students like to try out. But he has particular sayings also, and some of them do ring in my head often. There's one that he says, like, got to take it to the edge. And that's in relation to the way that you practice, the goals that you have for yourself, the goals that you set for yourself, the expectations that you have for yourself. And I think helping to empower students to be able to have high expectations for themselves, to be able to, see beyond where they might think that they are or what they might think that they can achieve, and be able to be like, oh, maybe if I practice more and if I listen to these recordings and whatnot, then actually I can have a higher conception than I, initially thought for myself. So I think sort of these inspiring ideas of practice that Hans have had uh, definitely are carried with me. um, with Lesser, I think it he encouraged a sort of exploration into outside interests that I think that I had, but I didn't realize how much they could infuse the practice room and the teaching space.
Nice.
Um, so also encouraging students to go to art museums, to go to galleries, to take history classes, take art history classes, going to concerts, all of these things I think add so much to your own thought process, even, which is one of the most important things in the practice room, and in the teaching studio and on the performance space. So I think those are ways that Hans and Lesser have carried on in my own teaching and work.
Excellent, excellent. I want to come back to what you just said as it relates to actually all three of your bios of the Merz Trio. But first, a question about the orchestral world. Um, Among your videos on YouTube, there's one of you recording an orchestral audition, and the quite frankly, the way you play the Bartered Bride excerpt is really, really good. I like to point to that one to students. And it's one of those things where even with my current studio, but I mean, it's a timeless issue. I'm sure it will always be the case that there are some who are working on trying to get to that next metronome, move a click up and keep it controlled, keep it clean, you know, and you make it look easy. So I wonder, do you have recommendations, suggestions for how to practice that really, really the stuff that's faster than you're able to think?
Yeah, that stuff is really tricky. And I think finding different ways to practice it, like different things to focus on so that you're not always focusing on the same thing every time you practice it. Eventually, when you're playing the excerpt under pressure, it is good to have like one or two words, potentially just character words that you focus on so that your mind is not distracted. But in the practice room before that, like having some sessions where you're just focusing on lifting your fingers, lifting each one of your fingers so that each one is very organized and clean. And then after that, you can focus on just putting down your fingers like hammers, and then focusing sort of on the feeling of relaxation in each finger as you put it down, or rotation. Um, and thinking, you can do different exercises along the same lines with your right hand, like articulation, articulating every single note, like in a martelé style, so that each note is very clean and crisp, and then thinking another time of just about the string crossings and like how to execute those in as clean a way as possible. And then eventually, like after sort of things are a little bit figured out, and I keep going back to these different sort of little practice tools at different stages of learning the excerpt, because you sort of run into roadblocks as you go along. Um, there's a lot of working things up with metronome as well, and doing different rhythms with metronome, but in particular, working things up with metronome, and then trying to get the metronome like playing with the number of impulses. So when you're saying like it's faster than you can think, like when you're first practicing it, you might practice like ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-da, like a quarter, like that. But then eventually maybe you'll do a half note impulse. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da. And then maybe even if you can work your way to a whole bar at a time. Something like that. So that actually, if you're thinking in these really slow impulses, it doesn't feel fast. And I think that is kind of a key to practicing a lot of quick repertoire that feels faster than you can think. And you're like, how can somebody play that? I just can't even think about all the notes. Like if you think really slow, if you get the impulses to a slow enough tempo that you can think in those impulses, then it becomes a lot easier.
Wow. I look forward with the students I have in mind of unpacking every aspect of what you just said. That's really, really great. There was a lot in there that was so valuable. And it's, I think with the kind of break it down, divide and conquer, try it in every which way is also important as an antidote to feeling stuck or getting impatient with yourself or frustrated, because you keep playing with the parameters, keeping it alive and fresh. That's great. So I want to ask you also about, I have a number of specific questions about the Merz Trio, but you've played a lot of chamber music in general. And I think particularly as a cellist, there's a substantial difference between what we do in a string quartet and what we do in a piano trio. So I'm just do you have some thoughts about, do you flip a switch in terms of your playing when you're playing in a piano trio versus a string quartet?
Yes and no. A lot of the skills are absolutely transferable between the two, of course, but I would say that there are some distinct differences that I feel when I play the two. I always wanted to play in a quartet. That was my absolute dream. And I was playing in a quartet for a little while, and that's the reason I moved to New York also to do Ensemble Connect. And then it fell apart, and then the trio started. So that was sort of unexpected. And I fell in love with trio playing too. But but with quartet playing, the majority of the playing that you're going to do is going to be on the bottom three strings. And of course, you play a number of solos in quartet as well, but it's not as consistent. It's not as often. And also in quartet, of course, you don't have a pianist left hand playing along with you. You're really in charge most of the time of guiding the bass line, and guiding the harmony often, which is a huge role, and also very difficult, and something that I found at least takes a lot of experience just to even understand the harmonies. Like you can learn how to intuitively understand the harmonies. I mean, also learn how to know what they are, but to understand how to feel them, and how the feeling, for instance, of a dominant chord can lead to a tonic and all the chords in between. That just takes a lot of experience, I think, and understanding and listening to music. And sometimes it feels more natural than other times. And in some kinds of music, it feels more natural than in other kinds of music. Um, I found that the type of sustain that I need for quartet versus trio is different. Um, in quartet, again, you don't have this piano with a pedal that has all this sound that's like helping you a lot of the time. Instead, you're the base of the quartet, so often you have to provide this sort of basis of sound. And I often find that the type of sound that I need is a more sort of full sustained sound that everybody can like come into. Of course, it really highly depends on the repertoire, but just as a generalization. With the trio, in contrast, I find that I don't necessarily need that kind of sound all the time because there is sort of this body of piano sound that's helping you. And so instead, like having really defined and particular articulation is extremely important. And like a type of articulation that maybe you need more often in trio than in quartet, which is like just very defined, like a piano key, like a hammer. I guess like always just trying to find ways that all three of the instruments, the piano, the cello, and the violin, can really understand each other and speak to each other. And in the trio, it often means, not with all your articulations, but with a lot of them being very specific and articulate. And it's often more articulate than you think, I would say, at least for the many groups that I've coached with piano, the strings with piano often need to articulate a lot more. So that's sort of a common theme. I would say piano trio playing for the cello is a lot more like playing sonatas. So if you've played many sonatas or are used to that kind of collaboration, it is quite similar, and the skills are, there's a lot of crossover skills and similar amounts of playing melodies and things like that. It's a lot of fun playing trios, but I would say quartet playing, you also have to really know how to blend with strings and to adjust your intonation and to have fingers that are that feel even more malleable potentially in string quartet, because you're always adjusting and listening and like just, you know, slightly moving your fingers so that it'll just land in that perfect spot that creates this resonance.
Wow, that was very well said again. All right, now, as far as the Merz Trio goes, I debate a little bit about what order to do these questions in. But so like the name of the trio itself is speaks to what is the word you use in your trio bio? Messiness that you like, that you embrace? You know, and I think that's the first thing I want to ask about, because listening to any of your recordings, the last thing that comes to mind is messy. But what you mean by messy is, in a way, a willingness to brainstorm and think outside the box and to look for tie-ins with all manner of aspects of life and other arts. I think. Would you elaborate on, did you, maybe even the name Merz was your doing?
Merz was sort of a collaborative concept that we sort of came to, and the violinist in the trio suggested the name Merz, which comes from the German artist Kurt Schwitters, Dada artist. Merz it's a nonsense word. It comes from Commerz, but he just chopped off the com part, the business, and just Merz became this umbrella term that Schwitters used for all of his various art projects. He did a lot of collage with found objects, but he was also a multidisciplinary artist. So when we were coming together as a trio, this idea of being inspired by all the different art forms, or not all of them, but as many as caught our interest, was a sort of something that was cohesive for the trio. So actually, both the violinist and founding pianists were also literature majors, a double degree, or whatnot, studied piano and literature in different capacities. And we all had a whole, variety of other interests that were perhaps less formal. We didn't necessarily go to school for them. But for instance, we've done different collaborations with sommeliers and with chefs. And we're not the experts in that scenario, but we enjoy wine, we enjoy different dishes, and thinking about um, how the two art forms or media can talk to each other, how they can have conversations. So, for instance, we did a salon where we paired different poems with particular pieces, and then we asked the sommelier to pair four different wines, and we sort of had a course that went through. And the funny thing was that the wine pours were a little bit larger than we anticipated. So by the end of the event, everybody was in a fantastic mood, and maybe it wouldn't have even mattered exactly what our pairings were, but it was just a fantastic time. Um, yeah, and but it's not. I guess we've also worked with directors, with dancers, with puppeteers, and our projects they can be messy because often because we're not the experts in these other media, the process at first feels like a little amorphous. Like we might come in with an idea like, oh, we're thinking about um, the Shakespearean play and we would like you to embody Lady Macbeth. But how exactly that looks like, we're not really sure. And being able to workshop, finding ways to create a common language with the other artists or artisans is part of the process and exciting, but also imperfect in a lot of ways. And I think that's why it can feel messy, but ultimately it often feels very rewarding.
I love that. I love that. I have played with some chamber musicians who prefer to have things set as far as when we go out on stage, we're going to take this much time here. And do you know what I mean? And I'm not cut from that cloth. I like the feeling like you're in the moment and you have to relinquish a certain amount of control over your own limbs. It's like, hey, it's your melody. I'm attached to you. And there's a way in which I mean, that's even just among musicians. The times, for example, I've gotten to collaborate with dancers like you have, and there can be times where I think I know how I want to shape this particular phrase, and they're going, no, 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 no. We don't. There's no way we can complete this move in that amount of time, and it forces you to just step further outside of the parameters you've been using to decide to make these decisions,
Mm.
and kind of let go a little bit. Would you say?
Absolutely. And I think that analogy to like what we're trained in chamber music that you were saying, just being able to let go of your own preconceived notions of how exactly a phrase should go and really be listening and creating a collective idea. I think that's really apt to describe the larger process of working with other artists.
Cool. I also want to ask you about, I mean, this very principle of um, collaboration and thinking outside the box and even just breaking down the fourth wall where you interact with the audience and all these things. I think that it's so important these days. And I know for the sake of my students, any students probably by and large, when they're in their lessons, it feels like their instruction is about how technically to play the instrument, how musically to get this or that effect, but this willingness to be kind of entrepreneurial and just always looking for new ways to get our artistic message and vision out to people and in different ways. I mean, let me ask it this way. Is any of that in your case related to the business minor that you got at Northwestern, or did you always kind of have that sort of leaning and that's what led you to want the business minor? You know what I mean?
That's a good question. I think I think both of those statements are true. I think I did have this leaning, but I think also taking the business classes was empowering. Um, Being able to believe that, oh, we can form our own. First, we formed a general partnership, and now we're a nonprofit, and like those things are possible. Like we can do this as musicians, and we can form a board, and we can ask for donations to make these sorts of projects possible. So I think those types of skills make it feel more possible and less overwhelming. Um, but honestly, I think a lot of I would actually like give New World Symphony a lot of credit
Hmm.
in terms, even though I didn't want to become an orchestral musician, ultimately they had a whole lot of resources that they wanted their musicians to take advantage of in sort of with Michael Tilson Thomas as like an inspiration because he's done so many projects that bring music out of the concert hall and it's he's always asking how music can interact with the world at large. And I think New World Symphony is sort of like they call themselves a laboratory for classical, for orchestral music, but they're wanting musicians, fellows individually to try to do their own projects, and they'll give you resources if you can propose something, a little bit coherent, even if it's experimental and you don't really know what you're doing, especially potentially like right out of school and you're really figuring things out and you just get to try things. So I think finding places that give you those types of opportunities. And that might even be at your university where you can apply for grants to do different projects and just knowing that those resources are there and that you have mentors in your teacher or professor or, you know, whoever those people might be. Um,
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's just comes from a variety of different experiences and then desires and then looking for how that might be possible. Like believing, first of all, believing that it is possible somehow and then looking for how you can actually make it happen. And a lot of times it doesn't necessarily work. Like you run into walls and it's like, okay, I guess that one didn't work. But that's okay. Like at least as long as some of your ideas come to fruition and you're like,
Right. And
um,
we can't be discouraged by the things that don't work. So was Ensemble Connect also kind of along those lines in terms of uh, helping to think of other ways to connect the audience with the performers?
definitely. Yeah, that's a large part of their mission, creating interactive performances. Um, so performances usually 45 minutes to an hour in which you usually choose one theme and scaffold a performance so that you do different activities in service of this theme to it's usually with some sort of educational component in mind. That's a big part of what they do at Ensemble Connect, but then it carries over to public speaking, speaking from the stage, figuring out how to engage an audience, how much information, for instance, you want to get across, as opposed to how you're packaging that information and how you're presenting it. Um, yeah, we had there are a number of different workshops on that, so that was helpful, and that's something that absolutely my trio, for instance, even when we play concerts and travel to different cities, there's 50% of the time an educational component. So we'll go to a school, we'll do a master class, we'll do an interactive performance, we'll coach a string orchestra, and we always speak from the stage when we play concerts. So those
That's
skills were
great.
definitely helpful.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So let's see. I ask every guest a question about motivating students. I mean, part of the purpose of this series is just if if we're watching something at the beginning of the weekend when some people might kind of take the weekend off, but hopefully we can gear up and get a ton done over the weekend. What are some of your favorite ways when a student needs just a little bit of extra help in the motivation department? What thoughts do you have for such students?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think there are different things. In the lesson in particular, one of my favorite ways to sort of engage a student is to have them to figure out, like, basically open their listening by having them focus on different parts of their playing that they didn't realize were necessarily there before. So, for instance, often in the beginning, when I'm first working with a student, we'll spend a few weeks thinking about intonation and thinking about different ways to think about intonation, different like systems of thinking about intonation, and having them do scales, thinking about one system at a time, for instance. So for instance, I'll have them play scales with a drone as one sort of thing, but then I'll have them play scales thinking about whole steps and half steps. So trying to measure in their mind how large is a whole step and how large is a half step for the scale up and down. And then, when I listen to their scales, I'll ask them, okay, like, so consistently on the way down, one of your fingers was usually flat. Which one was that? And then like they'll be like, wait a second, I wasn't expecting this question. And then they'll have to think backwards, right, and see how much they're focusing. And if they don't know, they'll do it again and then listen for that specifically. So just sort of opening up the focus. And I think, in my experience, students, if they're not like caught off guard by that sort of thing, they're actually like inspired by that to be like, oh, I can be listening a lot closer, and actually I can really hear exactly how large this interval is, and they have something to focus on when they practice, for instance, and they can bring that to different pieces, like, can you focus on this type of intonation for this particular passage? And for me, with my students, I try to make it feel somewhat manageable, like, just do this many measures, but really focus on this particular concept for that whole time. So just some sort of exercise to really get their mind going. And once they do that, then they're going to think about it for other pieces, other pieces that they're playing, etc.
Yeah, great points. The tendency for students to bite off more than they can chew, and then they're going to be disappointed because their expectations were unrealistic. Or the times that they even if they think that they're concentrating and focusing on what they're doing, they can always take it another level, and the time passes more quickly when you do that too, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, tremendous. So plans for the rest of 2024. I know on your website we can find these out, but maybe you can also elaborate on some of the upcoming concerts and other projects you have in the works.
Yeah, so different projects. This month I've been playing with a Far Cry, a conductorless string orchestra. It's a group of about 18 musicians, 3 cellists, and it's a pretty intensive rehearsal process because it's conductorless, and so necessarily every single musician needs to know how to lead the music and how their parts interact with other parts of the orchestra. That's a whole lot of fun. So that's a 5-concert tour that we're on at the moment. I go to Napa pretty soon to play some trios with a friend, Geneva Lewis, violinist, and Audrey Bardenega. Wonderful players. We're going to play Schubert B flat trio among some other works. So I'm very excited about that. I'll have an upcoming fall tour with the trio. It's largely East Coast. Connecticut, a few concerts, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, New York. So that's early fall. I'm starting a new sort of group with a clarinetist and a pianist, two friends of mine who I love their playing, and wonderful people. And so we're, of course, going to do the Brahms clarinet trio, but we're also doing a whole mixed program of new and old works. Um, so we're going to begin working on that program. I don't believe we have performances in the fall for that. And yeah, I play with another group in New York, and they're a multidisciplinary group that um, does lighting projections and in their concerts. So the head of the group is a flute player, but he's also a lighting designer and works with projections. So that's really fun. It's always different. It's in various interesting spaces in New York City. So I'll have a couple of those concerts. I'll be working with Valley of the Moon Festival. They're based in Sonoma, and Tanya Tompkins and Eric Zibian are the founders, and they play classical, largely classical, some Baroque music on on instruments with gut strings and classical bows. And I haven't done that much of that work, so I'm actually going to be a fellow in that capacity and work with them throughout the year and play some concerts with them and through them. And I'm really excited about that. That's sort of just an educational component for myself to learn how to play on gut strings, to use those bows. I've had that interest because I love hearing recordings when players are playing on gut strings and with different bows and with forte pianos and things like that. And so I'm really excited for that project. So that's sort of going throughout the year.
Nice.
So yeah.
Wow. Sounds like you're certainly continuing to keep yourself busy.
And I'll be teaching at Ohio State this year. So
Tremendous.
it'll be busy, but I'm really excited about it.
Good. That's so important. Yeah, the gut string thing, to me, it's still the A415 that just always sounds so flat. It's like, ugh. Can I please tune my string? Nope, nope, it stays there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's gonna be an adjustment.
Fingers want to correct, go back up to A40. No, no, don't do that. Wow, that's terrific. I so much. I mean, your playing level is so high. If you wanted to, you could have just gone kind of the traditional route. I play cello in concert halls where the audience is over there and I'm over here on the stage. But I salute you also for doing so much to proactively engage audiences. I mean, in part, that is going, if anything, is going to help keep classical music alive. It's that. It's us continuing to find ways to go to them and draw them in and take away the fear factor of art music, all the arts. So brava to you, and thank you for this interview. So many things, so many really well said, valuable things. I enjoyed it every bit as much as I knew I would. So thank you, Julia.
Benjamin, it's a huge pleasure for me.
Oh, good. Oh,
Thank you
good.
for your really thoughtful questions as well.
Excellent, excellent. All right, and to all of you out there, have a wonderful weekend of practicing, and we'll meet back here this time next Friday. Take care.
You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Playing the cello has